going to tell us this morning. But it's spring, and I've been inspired by what some of you have said about watching birds at your feeder, or deer nibbling a shrub, or the rabbits coming through your yard. It's a poem by Mary Oliver from one of her early books, House of Light. And the poem is entitled 5 a.m. in the Pine Woods. I'd seen their hoof prints in the deep needles and knew they ended the long night under the pines, walking like two mute and beautiful women toward the deeper woods. So I got up in the dark and went there. They came slowly down the hill and looked at me sitting under.
Did you get it?
So, Vicki, just a second, just a minute. I'm going to mute everybody so you can have the floor again, but you'll have to turn your sound back on.
Okay. You want me to start over?
Would you please?
Okay. A poem by Mary Oliver. 5 a.m. in the Pine Woods. I'd seen their hoof prints in the deep needles and knew they ended the long night under the pines, walking like two mute and beautiful women toward the deeper woods. So I got up in the dark and went there. They came slowly down the hill and looked at me, sitting under the trees. Shyly, they stepped closer and stared from under their thick lashes, and even nibbled some damp tassels of weeds. This is not a poem about a dream, though it could be. This is a poem about the world that is ours, or could be. Finally, one of them, I swear it, would have come to my arms, but the other stamped a sharp hoof in the pine needles like the tap of sanity, and they went off together through the trees. When I woke, I was alone. I was thinking, so this is how you swim inward. So this is how you flow outward. So this is how you pray.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful images. Thank you. So this morning, as we let those images and that sense of spring and wonder sink in, we'll start to turn our attention to John Steepy, who has agreed to talk with us this morning about some of the questions he's encountered in his life. John, you'll need to unmute yourself.
I think I am.
Good.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I must say I'm a little nervous, but we'll proceed nonetheless. This is going to be about my life, and as Mary said, some questions that have arisen as time has gone on. First, I'll talk about my family. My mom was an only child. She was born in the Pennsylvania Dutch country of Pennsylvania. My dad was from the Trenton, New Jersey area, and he had an older brother and sister and a younger brother and sister. My parents met, I think it was sometime in late 40, or were married in 1941. My dad was working in Baltimore, and in May of 1942, my sister was born, my only sibling, my sister Sandra. Dad was drafted into the Army in World War II, served in Normandy, and while he was overseas, my mom and sister moved in with my mother's mother in Sayre, Pennsylvania. And if you know where Sayre, Pennsylvania is, you are a geographical nut or a cartographer. I don't know which. Okay. Now, Sayre is known for two things, or was known for two things, still known for the Robert Packer Hospital / Guthrie Clinic. And at the time was also known as a division point on the Lehigh Valley Railroad. And I'll get to why those are important in a few minutes. Well, Dad returned from the war. He worked in Sayre. And I was born in the Guthrie Clinic, Robert Packer Hospital in Sayre in 1947. Now, Dad liked working with his hands. He got a job after the war in Sayre. He was a machinist. He was working at Ingersoll Rand in a town nearby. And my mother, for some reason, didn't like her husband coming home with dirty clothes and greasy hands. And it was her dream that her husband be a white collar guy. So he eventually got a job with as an insurance claims adjuster with the General Adjustment Bureau in Elmira. At age 7, Dad was transferred to the Rochester office. But my grandmother still lived in Sayre, and we visited quite often, probably about once a month. My dad's family, staying in Trenton, well, we visited there maybe twice a year, and in the summer times, usually when Dad got a week's vacation or took a long holiday weekend to travel. And these were always good times. I always enjoyed being down there with my family that I didn't see very often. And part of the fun of that was my older cousin Bobby. He had a white 1959 Chevy something convertible, red interior. And my sister, my older cousin, and Bobby, they were all older than me, but they let the little runt kid come along. I was about 5 years younger. And there was nothing like being so cool, riding around in that convertible in South Jersey, listening to Cuzzy Brucey Morrow on WABC in New York. It was the epitome. But we had a good time. But I always felt connected to my family. I always felt loved. And I think that that nurturing that was bestowed on me, I think it served me well. So we moved to Rochester, and I liked Rochester. There was a lot of kids in the neighborhood. There was always a lot of activities to do. We were always having fun. Not all of it was parent approved, but nonetheless, we had a good time. I learned to play baseball. I played in Little League. I liked school. I liked learning. I had a lot of friends, and life was good. In the late 50s, Dad was offered a transfer to Erie, Pennsylvania. And since my sister was about to enter her senior year at the new East High School, and I was about to finish my last year in 7th grade at PS 52, he declined that transfer. Sometime later, with Sandy and I being newly minted graduates, my dad was offered a transfer to Geneva to manage their office there, and I think he figured at that point he'd better not refuse too many transfers, so we were off to Geneva. August 8th, 1960. I will always remember that day. For me, it wasn't a good move, and I'll get into that. A little bit about Sandy. She had graduated from high school, and she had good secretarial skills. And Geneva, she moved with us, of course, to Geneva, and she got a job at Hobart College. She was the secretary to, I think it was the provost. She didn't have any college, but she was certainly smart enough. You know, back in those days, the narrative was, you know, you're the male of the family, the young male. So you were to study and get good grades and go to a good school and get a good job and have kids, and you get married and support your family, and that was the narrative. And I'm not sure that Sandy ever really bought into that, but that's the way it was back then. So in 8th grade in Geneva, I should say I started junior high in 8th grade in Geneva, and I was the new kid on the block, the city slicker. I didn't know anybody, and I was bullied and teased unmercifully. I learned to hate school. I hated learning. I hated studying. I did not want to go. I didn't want to be there. And my mom was sort of a don't rock the boat kind of a person. So I was never really taught to stand up for myself, to fight back, to address the bullies. So I stayed in my shell. I withdrew. I didn't join any clubs. I didn't really do anything. It was classes and go home. So I learned to be an introvert, and I still am. And that's been the thread through my life, for much of it anyway. I get to know people and I can get to trust people, but it takes me time. There were 3 good things that came out of Geneva junior high. I was good enough to play junior varsity baseball. Friend Dave and I were good buddies all through high school. And I didn't know it at the ripe old age of 13, but I was sharing classroom space with a girl that would grow to be the woman that I would love and eventually marry. And I'm still married to, 52 years later. She's somewhere on your screen. I don't know where. High school was a little bit better. I had some friends, close friends, not too many, couple. Played varsity baseball, but otherwise I was pretty much generally withdrawn, quiet. I was shy. I was good in math. I was good in algebra, geometry, trigonometry. So our high school guidance counselor decided that, gee, I'd be a good math teacher. So I was accepted at Geneseo as a math teacher. And apparently, having satisfied the state and local educational requirements, I did graduate from Geneva High School in 1965. And that fall, I went off to Geneseo. So here I was, a 17-year-old kid, first time on my own, no constraints other than to go to classes and learn something. Unfortunately, that didn't work out so well. And after 3 semesters, I was invited to leave. Well, I moved back home with my parents in Geneva. It was all kind of embarrassing for me, and I'm sure the hard part, I think, was disappointing my parents to some extent. But I had a plan. I was going to go to community college, get my grades back up, and go back to Geneseo. But I was obviously delusional because there was no way they were going to take me back. In the meantime, Sue and I were kind of on and off in our relationship. We had dated, twice or so in high school, late in high school, senior ball and that kind of thing. And we hung around that summer after graduation. But after a while, we sort of went back and forth. She was in nursing school in Rochester, and I was taking classes at Auburn Community College. But in 1969, we finally got our act together. She graduated with her registered nurse certification, and I had my associate's degree in accounting. Yes, I had changed my major. And on August 23rd of that year, we got married. Now, in the meantime, I'd been looking for a 4-year school that I could hopefully get into and finish my 4-year degree. I wanted a small men's business college. I wanted to concentrate on a business degree. So I found a place called Nichols College it's outside of Worcester, Massachusetts. was less than 1,000 students. It wasn't co-ed, but I didn't care. I was married. And I like the idea that they took a practical rather than a theoretical approach to their curriculum. I applied and I was accepted. After our marriage, after our wedding, we honeymooned in Cape Cod, and then Sue and I moved to Southbridge, Massachusetts, which was about 10 miles from school. Sue worked in the hospital, and I studied. But I think I found a purpose in life, and it felt good to be a quote unquote responsible person. I like my courses at Nichols. I think they were excellent courses, and the teachers had come from the business world, not so much from teaching in four walls. They had practical experience, and I really liked that. So in 1971, after 6 long years, but who was counting, I graduated with my bachelor's in business administration. My work life started in 1971 with the Fowler Company. Some of you may remember Cybron Corporation, Ritter and Taylor and whatever. Fowler was one of their companies. And I started there in 1971. I was there for 13 years. I had progressed from cost accounting to the cost accounting manager, to budgeting, to general accounting manager, to the international accounting. And they were eventually sold to Standard Oil, and that's when things started to get messed up. So after 13 years, I left. I wanted to be have a broader perspective of a smaller company. So I went to a company where I could be a controller, and I also took on human resources responsibilities. Human resources, I studied it in school, but this was really my first practical experience with it. Now, this particular company was part of a European. It was owned by a European fellow, and all of his executives were his countrymen. And when he came over to the United States and visited us, he liked to take his executive countrymen out to for long lunches, at which they consumed mass quantities of beer. And it was not unusual for them to come back to work. They'd stumble through the front door, stumble into the conference room, close the door, and I don't know what. One day they came back from one of these excursions, their long lunches, and the director walked into my office, teetering back and forth, smelling like he'd taken a beer bath, and he fired me. No explanation, no reason, no whatever. And I figured, well, you know, that's not a bad place to leave. So I did. For the rest of my time, my career, I really, small manufacturing businesses. That's what I like to work in. It gave me a chance to really diversify, because some of the positions I eventually took over, not only human resources in addition to the accounting, but the safety, and in one company in particular, even the computer services. So I like small companies. I like wearing a lot of different hats and doing different jobs. It was a nice diversion. I wasn't bogged down in one thing all day, and I liked that. I worked for a company that, well, eventually they closed. They moved to Mexico, so I was laid off at age 62, and that put a little bit of a startle into me. I was hoping that that place would remain until I was ready to retire, but they closed up shop. After a couple of months, I found another job that would sound okay, would at least tide me over and pay the bills until I was ready to retire. So I took over there as human resources and safety manager. It was run by two brothers who didn't get along. Constantly verbal abuse to each other and cussing at each other. And it was the most dysfunctional, unprofessional, hellish place I had ever worked, without question. And I remember at one point in my job interview, they had said, well, we hope you stay because we've always had trouble keeping employees in that job. So we hope you stay. And I didn't really know what they meant by that, but I found out as things went on that the place was so bad that whatever. But I came across a piece of paper as I was cleaning out files one day, and in 18 years prior to my date of hire, there had been 19 people in that job. People would come and go as a revolving door. And when I retired in 2021, after 23 months of enough's enough, I became their longest tenured human resources safety manager. Well, they had asked me to stay and train my replacement. And I think it was sometime after 4 months, they finally found the third or fourth person that they thought would look like they were going to stay. I mean, they would hire somebody, I'd bring them in, they'd work there for a week, they'd be gone. And I didn't think I was doing that bad a job, but I think they saw the culture of the company and just didn't want any part of it. So eventually I walked out of there and purely retired. It was great. My work life, it was good. As I mentioned, I like working in different jobs and different responsibilities, but it was really quite a range of things. I did everything from taking point on bomb threats to dealing with drunks and employees that were high. I remember one fellow, he was hiring a kite and he got hold of knives somewhere and he was waving them all around, and I had to talk him down until the cops could show up. And it was just that kind of thing. Being in human resources, it was all sorts of folks crossed my path, and a lot of times it was really very rewarding and very enriching to my life, but in other ways not so much. But it was good in a lot of ways. I designed and implemented accounting systems. I wrote employee handbooks. I wrote safety manuals. I hired, fired, trained, disciplined, all that good stuff. Made sense of numbers. Sometimes I even practiced creative accounting, but we won't talk about that too much. And it was a good work life, and I was glad to be done with it in 2021. I'm enjoying retirement. As far as my religion background is concerned, I was raised Presbyterian. And I remember the Presbyterian church in Sayre. I remember hearing of Jesus and his disciples and born of the Virgin Mary. And somehow that just stuck with me for some reason over the years. And I didn't know what it meant, but I could recite it because there were creeds, of course, that we recited, even as little kids. In Rochester, my parents joined the Orthodox Presbyterian Church on Merchants Road. And of course, all us younger kids, we went to Sunday school, which was let out in time for us to go to church with our parents. And we all did. We sat in hard wooden pews. And as a little kid, or 7, 8, 9 years old, didn't really want to be there. And especially when the sermons lasted well over an hour in many cases. It was like, how much fire and brimstone can I listen to? But listened I did. Otherwise, an elbow in my ribs for my mother. In Geneva, we joined the North Presbyterian Church, and as a teenager, I still thinking about this born of the Virgin Mary thing, I finally became worldly enough to understand what was meant by that. And then it was kind of a what? How can that be? And I was also thinking at that time that, gee, Mary was missing out on a lot of fun. But that aside, I did what I needed to do. I went to church. In 1969, Sue and I were married at the First Presbyterian Church in Geneva. And our wedding day was okay, but we tease each other once in a while. We say, we should have eloped. It would have been easier, would have been a better day, maybe. When after our honeymoon, as I said, we went to Southbridge, Massachusetts, and that was the start of not going to church for a long time. Sue worked a lot of Sunday mornings and Sundays, and I studied. And we kind of got in the habit of just not going to church, except when we went back to Geneva for a visit. And it was usually holidays, so we go to church on Christmas and Easter. And that was pretty much the extent of it. We just, I guess we felt we had a good Christian upbringing, and we didn't need to do anything more with it. So we moved back to Rochester. We'd been living there for some 40 years, in fact. And Sue went to an event at church, at First Unitarian. She'd been invited, I don't know, say Sangha, is that, I don't know if that's the right word, a Sangha or an event. And she enjoyed it. So she started going to services. She'd come home and rave about the sermons and how wonderful it all was. And you know, really, she was really pumped up. And once in a while, she'd get me to go with her. And that was good. But, you know, it was the first time I'd been in a church and heard a sermon that didn't include the words Jesus or God. And that struck me. And I thought, wow, you know, this is totally different. But I had joined some groups. I had been in some groups, not yet a member, but I thought, boy, this is a good place to be. So in 2014, I joined. And since I'm a member of the Environmental Justice Ministry. I write the green tip for the church newsletter every other week. I'm a Soul Matters facilitator. I am in a writers group, and I enjoy the writers group. And when I failed in my bid for a seat on the church board, and I think it was 2016, I thought I'd take up managing the bookstore, and I've done that ever since, except for the last 2 years when nothing was going on. And I've loved the experience of being at First Unitarian. It's been a wonderful time there. I find everybody, present company included, wonderful, accepting. It's a non-judgmental community. Everybody is welcoming. I like the idea of deeds, not creeds. And it's been a place where the introvert in me can step out, can feel comfortable. And I've appreciated more than probably any of you can understand. But it's been a big step for me. I'm not the kind of person that makes friends easily, talks to people easily. You know, I'm not a party type of guy where I can just start chitty chatty with folks. That's not me. But being a part of First Unitarian reminds me that I have a lot in my life to be grateful for. I have a lot of blessings, and hopefully those blessings will continue on for a while yet. One other thing, well, a couple other things I want to talk about. Back in 1963 or 64, my sister Sandra married her high school sweetheart. His name was Dick Hill. And after graduation, Dick had tried the college route, didn't work out for him, so he decided on an Army career. After they were married, Dick went to officer candidate school and became a second lieutenant, was assigned to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and September of 65, they had a daughter. In late 1966, he received his orders for Vietnam. Now a first lieutenant, I believe at that time he would have been a platoon sergeant, or a platoon leader, sorry. And Sandy and my niece Stephanie, they moved back to Geneva with my parents, and it was a full house at that point. On Sunday, April 2nd, 1967, there was a knock at the front door, which I answered, and standing there were two Army men in their dress blues, and they asked for my sister. She overheard that. She came running to the door. She was informed that her husband, Richard A. Hill, was missing in action in Vietnam. Well, of course, the next couple of days, we were holding out hope. Okay, he's missing. He's still alive somewhere. But it wasn't too long. A few days later, I think we were notified that he had been killed in Vietnam on March 31st, the Friday before. And as you can imagine, that was devastating for my family, for Dick's family. There were a lot of crying, lots of crying, a lot of tears. And I felt like I'd been punched in the gut or something. I liked Dick. I respected him. He respected me. I didn't always approve of what he did, joining the Army and making it a career, but I respected him for doing that. He did what he believed. And he respected me. He didn't see me like his wife's younger kid brother, brat, that needed to be tolerated. He liked me as well, and we got along really good, and I missed him. So I decided at that point, Dick was buried in the Wacka Cemetery on, I think it was April 8th, the following Saturday. And I told myself at that point, there's no way in heck am I going to Vietnam. I made that vow to myself. After seeing what a waste that whole thing was, I said, no way. Well, just to tie it up, Sandy remarried in 1968. She married a hardworking fellow. He farmed 400 acres, family farm south of Geneva, and he worked full time at Hobart College in the maintenance department. So he wasn't afraid of work by any means. They had 2 kids of their own, plus my first niece, and they eventually had 9 grandchildren. Sandy ran a long and successful real estate business in Geneva for a number of years. I think she retired finally last year, but I think she still dabbles in it. And she lives in the family farmhouse, or one of the family farmhouses down there on their property, on their land. And sadly, she lost her second husband in 2020. It wasn't COVID related. He'd been ill and passed away. Part of my life had been exercising. When we were first married, I was overweight. Sue, working in the hospital, she knew a lot of specialists, so she kind of tricked me into going to see a cardio doctor. And I checked in at 240 pounds and probably a ton of lethargy. So he said, the car's no good if the engine's not running right. So I said, yeah, okay, well, I can believe that. So he put me on a diet and got me into running. I joined the Southbridge YMCA, and I started running around their 46 to a mile laps to a mile track. And you can imagine, it's like 2 steps and make a corner. But I did it. And after 8 weeks, I'd lost 50 pounds and I could run 5 miles in 35 or so minutes. And I kept that up my entire life. And made a pledge to myself that I will always do this. So 50 years, 30 minutes of cardio per day, run, walk, bike, whatever. And I felt guilty if I even missed a day. And the highlight thing, but I think it was not so much how far or how fast it became after years. It was just, can I get to the end of this? You know, it wasn't what it used to be, but I still enjoyed being out and doing some sort of exercise. And that changed in September of 2019. I started having very severe leg pain. In fact, I had trouble walking. My primary care physician said, no running, you're done. And that was borne out about a month or so later when I was diagnosed with spinal stenosis. In case you're wondering, spinal stenosis is a vertebrae pinches the nerve in your back, of course, and it can send referred pain to, I guess, whatever part of your body. In my case, it ironically wasn't necessarily my back, but it was my legs and my pelvic area. So I'm in constant pain to some varying degree, which exacerbated my depression. So with the help of 3 pain medications and some antidepressants and some psychotherapy, this being a real life changer, I've sort of changed that mantra. If I will always do this to I will do what I can do. And that's what I'm doing. I have learned that I can't physically do everything that I want to do, but I do the best I can. In terms of hobbies, Sue and I used to go to auto races a lot, Mid-Ohio and Watkins Glen, whatever, back in the early 80s. A bunch of work friends, we'd load up our van and we'd go to the races. I take a ton of pictures, which I last year donated some 1,500 slides to a racing museum in Watkins Glen. And as I mentioned, the railroading was always one of my things. So I used to take a lot of pictures of trains, and I donated a bunch of slides to the Penn Central Railroad Historical Society. And it was Northeast Railroad back in the 70s, and ironically, their historical society was in Texas, but nonetheless, I sent them a bunch of slides last year. So if anybody needs any slide trays, I've got a bunch of them. You know, just let me know. I'll make sure you get them. I've always been a model railroader. I think probably except for the first couple of years that Sue and I were married, I've always had a layout of some kind. And it's not toy trains. They're trains that are built to be operated like a real railroad. And this whole thing, I think, started, you know, as a little kid, like most, I'll say, people, because it wasn't only guys that got trains as a kid and build on that experience. And that's what I've always done. And I've always enjoyed it. And it's an outlet for my creativity, designing, building, carpentry, electricity, a little bit of everything involved in building a model railroad. I also like working with my hands. I like woodworking. I like writing. It's with my mind and my hands. And it keeps me busy and I enjoy it. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Sue and I have had, we have no children, but we've had dogs over the years, 12 of them to be exact, but pugs, the French bulldogs, the rescue greyhounds, and now we have a little rescue terrier, 30 pounds of terrier, yeah, terrier. And we've been without dogs maybe 5 years that we've been married. You know, during that 50 some years, we've been 5 years without dogs. So I gotta watch my time. A couple of, I guess, a couple of anecdotes here I can tell you quickly. When my sister worked at Hobart College, she had a 1958 Ford, and she let me borrow it every once in a while. And she didn't know this, but I found out that from a standing start, it's the only automatic car I ever drove that if you step on the gas from a standing start, the car would lay a patch of rubber and squeal the tires when it kicked into second gear. Not first, but second gear. And I thought that was amazing. But motorheads might like that idea. In high school, I don't really remember a whole lot of my classes, but I took 3 years of English from a teacher that we were astounded to know had taught a lot of my classmates' parents. So she'd been around that long. She had a really nasty demeanor about her, but I think she taught me some good things about English. And one of them mainly being I could write a coherent sentence. Can't always speak it, but I can write it. I also took 2 years of French from an Italian lady. And I could never understand why I got better grades in French than I did in English. But that was one of the quandaries that I've had all these years. How much longer do I have?
Well, as much as you'd like to take, I'm sure people will have some questions for you also.
Okay. I will say that in relation to that Vietnam thing, I did manage to find my way into the National Guard. I joined the Army National Guard in 1971. Vietnam was winding down, but I was number 76 in the draft, so I knew it was coming. I didn't want any part of the regular Army, so I joined the National Guard. And I wound up in a light maintenance company here in Rochester and fulfilled my 6-year obligation to them, 1 weekend a month and 2 summer camps every summer. And I have to say that I found the National Guard really to be a giant waste of time and money. We go to Camp Drum every summer and we'd fix all the vehicles that broke down on the way up. And when we got back to Rochester after the 2 weeks, we'd fix all the vehicles that broke down on the way back. And weekends were just sort of a make work thing. And we had a first sergeant that he really had a way with words. Now, keep in mind that back in those days, Army personnel wore solid green uniforms, the Navy, the olive drab uniforms. He had a way of saying things like if he saw somebody that he wanted for a detail, he would just yell out, "Hey, you in the green." And we would just kind of throw our arms in the air and keep on doing what we were doing until he could specify a little clearer what he wanted. Or he would say something like, "Hey, you 3 guys, I need half of you." Well, that didn't quite work out for us either. But I have to say there was one summer camp, Camp Drum. We were all in bed one night, and all of a sudden we heard a whistling, and the first sergeant was outside and he was yelling for all of us to fall out, get out there right away. So we're all groggy, we look at each other, but we throw on our uniform, we run outside. The first sergeant was kind of huddling around the other sergeants and they dispersed. And then the first sergeant looks at us and he says, sorry, go back to bed. I had my watch on upside down. I thought it was 6:30 in the morning. And it was a little after 12. And if you have an analog watch or clock, try that. It works. 6:30 or thereabouts looks a little after 12. So we just kind of moaned, let out a groan, and went back to bed. And yes, we got up at 6:30 like we were supposed to. Okay.
Hey, John,
Yes.
maybe if you have other anecdotes prepared, they'll fit in with some comments because you have one more. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say the questions. I'll just pose the questions. What would my life have been like if my father had stayed in Sayre, working as a machinist? What if he had taken that job transfer to Erie, Pennsylvania? What if he hadn't taken the job transfer to Geneva? What if I hadn't learned to hate school in Geneva? What if I weren't such an introvert? What if I wasn't afflicted with spinal stenosis? And not so much a question, but something that I've been kind of wrestling with for a lot of years is the fact that by vowing not to go to Vietnam, did I dishonor Dick Hill and others who fought and died there in Vietnam? And that's been a hard one for me. I mean, the others were sort of a, what if kind of things, but that last one is weighed on me for quite a while. And maybe someday I'll know the answer to that. So, okay. Thank you all.
No,
Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Well, while people prepare themselves, I'll just remind everybody that if you would just use the reaction button to raise your hand, and remember, you'll need to unmute yourself when you give your comment or ask your question of John. And I'll just say that I'm just getting to know John as the facilitator of my new Soul Matters group. And this is such a thoughtful presentation, John. I thought for a moment ago, I would say that when I look at you, I'll now forever on see you in a white convertible with a red interior.
I wish I were there so many times.
I also appreciate the really profound question that you posed at the end. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And I'll just open the floor for people who have questions.
Questions, comments, whatever.
Looks like Deborah can go first.
Well, I just love John, as I've known you, picturing you trying to lay rubber in your sister's car. It just doesn't fit with you. You, as I've known you through church anyway. So that was fun. I ache that the transition from school in Rochester to Geneva was so hard on you. Do you think that the introvert was always there and it just got exacerbated by the bullying and all of that? Or was it that profound of an impact that it really changed who you are inside?
I don't think I was an introvert before moving to Geneva. I never felt so alone as I did when I started 8th grade.
Wow.
It just totally shut me down. And it was such a reversal of my life in Rochester. As I said, I had a lot of friends. I really loved living up here. And my life changed.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you.
A really vulnerable time in middle school. Yeah.
Yep.
Nancy and Glenn?
Thank you, John. That was just so well delivered. As you described your situation with your last job, where I think you said 2 brothers were at each other's throats all the time, and they wanted you to stay on, and you found out that there were 19 predecessors to your job. But did you ever have the courage to tell them that maybe they were the problem as to why people didn't stay?
I did in fact have such an opportunity one day, yes. It was not uncommon. They had a turnover rate of about 100%. Honestly, I would hire people. I would bring them in. Supervisors would hire, and I would go through a process, usually a full morning process of, filling out all the required paperwork and doing safety training. I would train these folks, and that would take quite a while. I'd take them downstairs, and it would not be uncommon for them to see what was going on the shop floor. They'd go to lunch, and they wouldn't come back. I get a phone call from the supervisor, say, what happened to the guys you just brought down this morning to hire? And I said, well, I don't know. And then they come back from work, and they wouldn't come back. Well, the owners, they didn't really quite understand what was going on. And I told them one day, I said, well, for what you're paying, there's a real opportunity for people here to get hurt. And a lot of people did get hurt. So there's a lot of opportunity here to be hurt. Why do that when they can get the same money or even a little more down the street at the pizza joint or at the gas station or the convenience store or you name it? And they did not like that. They did not like hearing it. And they went off on me like you wouldn't believe. But I was at a point where I just in and out, in one ear out the other. And they could just never see themselves as part of the problem. It was always somebody else. And I think that taught me that it was no use. In fact, I'd had a couple of other folks, other long-timer employees come up to me, managers, and say to me, don't even try. Don't even try telling them anything sensible. They won't hear you. It won't matter. So I gave up.
That's amazing.
It seems like your story had a number of places where your courage showed through in other ways as well. I mean, deciding what to do with your life at 62, deciding as an introvert to take responsibility for human resources. That strikes me as a really big leap. Would you talk a little bit more about that? And then Barbara has a question.
Well, the first job I went to after all those accounting years at Fodler, as I said, it was in a controller's position, and it was certainly that was the main focus of my job. But I also, because nobody else knew how to do any of this stuff, and I had a business degree, they gave me the human resources function, and the more that I got involved with it, the more I came to like it. Certainly not all aspects of some of the things that I listed a little while ago, but I really liked working with the employees and trying to do something for them. I tried to enhance their lives through better benefits or better pay or better working conditions or whatever it might have been. And that gave me a great deal of satisfaction, a lot more than juggling numbers did. So it was really a transition for me. And yeah, it was hard when I had to stand up in front of a group to train, to do safety training, for example. That was tough. I didn't like doing that. Part of it was the fact, just the essence of safety training, and nobody likes to even sit through it. But to do that, it was really, that was a stretch. But I didn't mind the one-on-ones with employees or small groups of employees. That was okay with me, and it was okay for me. And I think that helped to kind of let me blossom out a little bit, if you will. And I did enjoy that part of my life.
So just before you, Barbara, Ernesto just chatted and thank you for the courage. I've lost the complete chat here. Just a second. Wanted to thank you for the courage that you've shown, and hopes to be as strong and compassionate as you are. That's just a chat from Ernesto. And next will be Barbara.
John, thank you so much for overcoming your nervousness and feeling comfortable enough in our community to share. I'm sure this has been an anxious week as you thought about
It
this.
has been, yes.
But you did a great job. And so hopefully it'll be a good night's sleep tonight. And it was great getting to know you a little better. I am curious. I'm going to turn a little bit away from the conversation that we've just been having. And I'm a little interested in your model train career. What kind of gauges? What I used to go to First Universalist, and the train club used to have a train set up in the basement there for thousands of years. And
They still do.
And so it was one of those things that you kind of acquire information by default because it was in the building, and then there would be this big event once a year and thousands of people, not thousands, but lots of people would come through. So tell us a little bit about your model trains, and are you still working with that? Are you still, and what what gauges were you engaged in?
Well,
I know
if
that's
you're-
an issue.
If you're familiar with the layout that's in the basement of the First or the Universalist Church, they're still there, and that is exactly the gauge that I work with. It's called HO. It's about half the size of what everybody might recognize as Lionel, which is O gauge, and HO is half O, HO. And that's what I've modeled in for the last however many years. And my favorite railroad that I do model is Lehigh Valley, because that was my hometown railroad. And there was a pedestrian bridge that went over the rail yards in Sayre, and I used to sit up on that bridge, and I think I inhaled too many diesel fumes, because that's where it kind of connected for me to, I really love watching trains. And so I model them as well.
So do you have a basement full or a den full of a train layout? I mean, it seems that most of the people that do that have a part of their house that's been taken over by a train display.
Third of my basement, roughly.
You don't have a picture.
It'd be more, but I got too much other junk down there. So I got a workshop, and whatever else, an essential storage space. But yeah, it takes up, it's a fairly sizable operation.
Thanks, John. We have time for just one last comment or question from John Randall.
Where's John?
Hi.
Hi, John.
I wanted to again thank John for the wonderful presentation. It struck me. We have a number of really significant kind of parallels, which sometimes we can chat about after service. But I wanted in particular to share, so I was, I don't remember what number I was, but I was certainly eligible to be drafted for the Vietnam War. And I felt that it was a violation of the Fourth Commandment. And I went to my, at that point, Lutheran minister and tried to say, how can the church not come out and against the war? It involves killing people. And you could see, kind of backpedaled and mumbled something about, well, we have an obligation to protect ourselves. And I said, I don't see that in the Bible, drawing on that. But I had, I had no doubt that I was not going to participate, certainly not in that. But I was taking the, going for conscientious objector status. And then I ended up getting a student deferment, which just simplified everything. But yet I still struggle, as you mentioned, with feeling like, but isn't it my responsibility? What about all the people who decide that they're going to go and fight for the country? And so I feel like there can't be sort of mindless complicity with that, because just like with what's going on in Ukraine, it's too easy for somebody at the top to make a decision that's going to affect, millions of other people with no personal consequences. The temptation to abuse that power is simply too great. And I think that, we have some amount of responsibility. In other words, it becomes really a personal decision. It has to resonate with you. And so I don't think in any way you're dishonoring somebody else for making a different choice. Because it seems like it has to come down to a personal decision. It can't be mindless complicity, or you get authoritarian, you get what we're seeing. Right now, which just totally breaks my heart. I actually have visited Lviv a couple of times. I've worked with Ukrainian developers for years. I have a bit of a personal connection. It just really breaks my heart to see this just mindless, willful destruction and murder of civilians. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you. I'm curious to know if that in any way helps.
Does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, John, it's been a wonderful time with you this morning. And I'm sorry that we have to stop soon. Go ahead.
Yeah, just thank everybody for tuning in, and I guess everybody stuck with me. I didn't see anybody dozing off, so it must have been all right. But yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Good.
I enjoyed it.
I will just add to what John said, that a few weeks ago when Mary Palmer talked about her colleagues in the convent, she told me she did it in that way as a means of honoring those people. And I think I would invite you also to think about how you honored your brother-in-law this morning by telling that part of the story and by raising the thoughtful question that you did. So I think we need to close to honor our time. I'll blow out our chalice, and I will just make two quick announcements. And one is that we really would appreciate people volunteering to be readers over the next few weeks, and you could do that by emailing any one of the buddies. And next week, Tom Perry is going to talk with us about how he works with and handles his feelings about the behavior that he doesn't approve of, that he knows about from his ancestry. So thank you so much, John, and to everyone.
Thanks
have a
to all
good
of you.
weekend.
Thank you.
John.
Bye.